We are going to continue into Matthew, though. This is one of the ones we're actually going to cover. We're going to go into Matthew chapter 5. We're going to keep going through the Sermon on the Mount. We're not going to quite finish it today, but we're going to go through a big chunk of it because I feel like these next three sections are well connected. We're going to read from 27 to 37 today. And you'll notice that I was kind of doing each section on its own because I want to talk about it. But I felt like these three were so very well connected, and this is also going to be connecting us to an issue that I feel is like a live wire in the church, but nonetheless needs to be talked about. And I've actually had this conversation with some people in this church because this is such a wild topic to get into. And so while we get into it, why don't we just I'm going to read you the whole passage, and then we're going to go back through it and break it down piece by piece. So starting with verse 27, said, you've heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery. But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to stumble, gouge it out and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to stumble, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to go into hell. It has been said, anyone who divorces his wife must give her a certificate of divorce. But I tell you, anyone who divorces his wife, except for sexual immorality, makes her the victim of adultery. And anyone who marries a divorced woman commits adultery. And again, you have heard it said that to the people long ago, do not break your oath, but fulfill to the Lord the vows you have made. But I tell you, do not swear an oath at all, either by heaven or for it is God's throne, or by earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. Do not swear by your head, for you cannot even make one hair white or black. All you need to say is simply yes or no. Anything beyond this comes from the evil one. All right. So let's get into it. It's a big section. As I said, I think this is a live wire in the church. It is, and the reason I say this is because although it starts right off the bat with adultery, and I feel like that one's very non-controversial, even outside of the church in our culture at large, right? Adultery, although it seems more tolerated than ever, it's still not considered good, right? Like no one, like you're not going to find someone who thinks it's a good idea, and to that I give credit. I'm glad our culture hasn't at least given up that entirely. But Jesus, in his style, in his method, in what he's been doing, once again, as I brought up to you last week when we talked about anger and murder, he does it once again where he says, look, it's not just the act itself, it's what goes through your mind. If you're going to be perfect and spotless and blemish-free, then the only way to do that is not only to not do the acts, it's to be greater than the Pharisees, greater than the teachers of the law, and that means you can't even have bad thoughts. And that's a really big ask. And I remember who here as a young Christian, or maybe even as a Christian today, or someone who's curious about the Bible or something, have read this and found this particular passage really confusing and really concerning. Because I know I did. I remember being a young Christian, I read this, and it talked about if your right eye causes you to stumble, you better gouge it out. And I was like, oh my God, what does Jesus ask me to do? What does he ask me to do? But again, this goes back to what he's been talking about. He's saying, look, if you're going to try and earn your own way, earn your own righteousness, you want to live fully righteous for God, and it be the only way that you can get into heaven, then the only way that that's possible is you got to take some pretty drastic measures. I love this particular passage because Jesus is both being extremely literal as well as extremely hyperbolic at the same time, right? Quite literally, the only way to do what you need to do is to mutilate yourself because you are unable, as you are, to accomplish the goal set out by God. It is impossible for you to live a life perfect and without blemish, without sin. What Jesus is telling us right here is that, look, once again, and this, of course, is going to come back later on when he's going to be talking about the sacrifice of himself, when he's going to be talking about what he's come to do, what his mission on earth is, and what he's come to accomplish. All of this is to show us how bad our sin is. Because as I've said before, it's always like a joke, at least between pastors, and you guys, I'll let you in on it. It's one of those jokes where you'll go to a conference with a bunch of teenagers, and like the speaker will get up there and be like, you know, the Lord's saying to me that there's some people here struggling with like addiction to pornography. And it's like, yeah, you're with a bunch of young boys that have access to the internet. It's like that's low-hanging fruit right there. Right? Being a man, being a young man, and unfortunately, as the stats are bearing out, even for young women today, this is becoming a bigger and bigger issue of lust. And Jesus is trying to point it out right from the beginning. It's not good enough that you just don't do the act. You can't even have those thoughts enter your mind. Because at the end of the day, what does it mean you deserve? What does it mean you have earned? Because as I've said before, I love the phrase that Jesus utters when he says, "The wages of sin are death." Why do I love that? Because a wage is something that you've gone out and worked for and earned. And what have you gone out, worked for, and earned? You've earned death because you've committed sin. The next part is this, when he gets talking about divorce, and this can get really confusing. And this is, I think, more of a live wire issue within the church because divorce, unfortunately, it's less common in the church. People always say, oh, look, it's like 50%. No, it's not. It's not 50%. It's not even 50% in the culture. It's not even 50% in the church. It's much lower than that. But it is a very hot topic, a very live wire issue. And I'm going to explain to you why I think that is as we get closer to the end of this section. But I want us to first go through this. It talks about how in verse 31 that anyone who's going to divorce his wife must give her a certificate of divorce. Now, this is very specific terminology. And I've heard this said by a lot of other pastors, and I cannot disagree with them more, where they'll say things like, yeah, see, the man had all the authority. He was the only one that was allowed to do this, blah, 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 blah. Rebecca, could you put up Mark chapter 10, verses 11 and 12 for me? He answered, anyone who divorces his wife and marries another woman commits adultery, and if she divorces her husband and marries another man, she commits adultery. The fact of the matter is, right, we often like to look at the cultures of the ancient world, and we see how patriarchal they often were set up. Men obviously were much more dominant, had a lot more of the power. Jewish culture was incredibly radical for its time. The test that it has in Leviticus, the test that it has to test for adultery is like, I'm not sure if you've ever read it, but it's like the woman has to get a cup of water, they just sprinkle some dust on it, and she drinks it. If she gets violently ill, then she's an adulteress. But what's most likely to happen? Like most ancient tests are like kind of barbaric. You know, like everyone knows the one about the witch, right? If you got a witch, what do? You hold her underwater. And if she drowns, well, she was a woman. But if she survives, she's a witch and we got to burn her, right? So no matter what, like this is a terrible test for people. And yet the Jewish culture, the Jewish system that we come out of as Christians, it was radically different in that there was so many systems set up to protect women, to uplift women, to allow women to have power over themselves and over their own lives. When we read this, it really bothers me because I feel like a lot of people read this in isolation and say, see, only the man could divorce. That's not true. The women could leave as well. But as Jesus points out, there was only one exception, and that was for sexual immorality. But then there's this other section that comes right after this. And this is the part that always gets me. And this is actually a part that I've actually had a lot of conversations with quite a few people about. Because this is the thing that is quite difficult. And it says, and anyone who marries a divorced woman commits adultery. I want us to also, and so we read what it said in Mark there. Can you also put up Matthew chapter 19? So this is back in the book of Matthew, and we're going to see it says, I tell you, anyone who divorces his wife except for sexual immorality and marries another woman commits adultery. So it's not just the woman becoming the victim of adultery, but also a man can be a victim of adultery. Luke chapter 16, verse 18. Anyone who divorces his wife and marries another woman commits adultery, and the man who marries a divorced woman commits adultery. They are both they are both committing adultery. And so this is a really complicated thing, right? Wait a minute. So this divorce and remarriage thing actually gets really complicated. And there's all this sin that gets wrapped up in this. And what on earth are we supposed to make of this? And so what it brought me back to is it begged the question, wait a minute. If this is such a big deal, if adultery and divorce are such a big deal, the question that we have to ask ourselves is, what is wrong? What is being violated? What is wrong here? What is wrong? What is the thing that's going on here? And I think in order to understand what is wrong here, and this comes into what he talked about with the oaths right after, and this is why I included this section, is we got to look at what is marriage. And marriage starts in Genesis chapter 2 in verses 22 and 23. It says, "Then the Lord God made a woman from the rib he had taken out of the man, and he brought her to the man. The man said, 'This is now bone of my bones, flesh of my flesh, and she shall be called.'" I totally grabbed the wrong one. Can you, you probably can't put up 24, can you? It is in 24 is the one. Oh, okay, there it is. She's taken another man. "This is why man leaves his father and mother and is united with his wife, and they become one flesh." This was the original intent of marriage, a permanent and lasting bond, because you weren't to identify, and this is one of the things, and Rebecca and I have had this conversation so many times. It's so strange to us when we will be talking to new young couples and stuff like this, and they're talking about getting married, or we'll know married people that keep separate finances. And we're like, are you one or are you separate? Like, what's going on here? How do you operate? How do you operate in trust and in love? How do you operate as one flesh if you're going to keep everything separate? But this is becoming more and more common, to the point where I remember when Rebecca and I actually got married and we were letting people know that we were going to do that, there were people that looked at us and said, "Why would you do that? Why would you, how could you do?" And it's like, because I trust them implicitly. This is why I'm making this oath of marriage. The other thing about marriage is this: it's covenant, not contract. So who can tell me what a contract is? Yeah, it's a binding agreement between two parties or two individuals, right? So you're bound to adhere to this. And that's it. That's a contract. Unfortunately, this is how we treat marriage today. And to be fair, in the law under the government of Ontario, right, which is the provinces are the ones that actually run the marriage law in the country. Under the province of Ontario, marriage is a contract. It is not anything more. It is a binding agreement between two individuals, and if one such individual breaks the contract, it voids the terms of the contract, right? And there can be penalties and punishments involved, although for some reason with adultery, we just totally turned a blind eye to that, and we just hand out certificates of divorce. But in Jewish culture, in ancient times, marriage was so much more than a contract. Marriage was a covenant. Who knows what a covenant is and how it's different than a contract? So we talked about covenant a little while ago. We talked about covenant in the conditions of Abram and God. When Abram is making the blood covenant with God, and he said, "God, I will serve you," and God says, "I will always be there for you and your people." And they make the blood covenant, and as Abram is finishing setting up the blood covenant and is getting ready to participate, God puts him to sleep, because God knows even then, he's saying, "Look, you do not have what it takes," because a covenant is this. It is your agreement, it is your oath, it is your pledge, your promise that I will do this thing no matter what. It does not matter if you adhere to your end of the deal. I will uplift my end of the deal no matter what. This is how marriage was, and this is how Christian marriage is still observed today. And so when Jesus is talking about it in these terms, this is why. Because just because someone violated the agreement that they made with you does not mean that you are now allowed to go back on your word. Right? This is why he says, let your yes be yes, your no be no. Because your word should mean something. And so I'm sure maybe this has popped up in your minds, and it certainly popped up in my mind when I was a long time ago when I had first started examining this issue. Okay, well, that's easy to say, but what about all these different reasons where there's like legitimate reasons for divorce, right? You have things like sexual immorality. You have things like domestic abuse, right? There are some terrible situations out there where divorce, being separated, being put away, as the word divorce means, may be necessary in order for safety, right? There are very real reasons for this. And I think the reasons that this is happening more and more and more, and the reason that divorce is becoming more and more and more prevalent is because we've changed the conditions of marriage. Think about it. Today, it's two young people, they meet each other and they fall in love and they're Twitter-pated, and then they're like, oh, I want to feel like this forever, and so they get married, and then guess what? 2 years later, things are different, life has changed, life moves on, difficulties happen, and maybe you don't feel quite so Twitter-pated anymore, maybe you don't quite feel the same way, and things start to change. Versus, let's go back to the time of Jesus for this particular case. We're going to go all the way back to the first century Judaism. And this is one of the things that, again, I disagree so often with so many people about. Because they'll say, oh yeah, in Jesus' day, you would trade your daughter for this, right? Because they would see things like, okay, well, there would be a dowry given so that and they were like, oh, that was a payment to the father for the daughter. No, that's not how marriage worked. Number one, a father had a great responsibility to protect his entire family, including his daughters. He had to provide for them. He was responsible for them. If they acted out of line, it fell on him, right? He had to provide for them. He had to take care of them. Their neglect was also put on him. And he was held responsible both socially and legally in the Jewish society. Having a family, having a wife, having daughters was actually a major responsibility. Because guess what? In 0 AD, there was no government assistance. There was no appealing to welfare. There was no getting EI. If you were broke, you starved to death. That was it. So having a family, having this was a major responsibility. And the negotiations would actually happen between two families for this reason alone. I don't want my daughter to die. I want my daughter to be taken care of, to be treated well, to be treated fairly, right? We will contrast ancient marriage rituals between other pagan societies with that of Judaism, but Judaism was very different. It brought about an incredible revolution to the idea of marriage, and we got to remember that is our roots. We come out of that. Jesus was a practicing Jew. He went to Hanukkah. And the fact of the matter is that the two parties involved and the whole family's getting involved and the whole community's getting involved. You'll remember we talked about that when we went through the book of Judges, that marriages were actually a whole community affair because everyone in the community knew each other, took care of each other, loved on each other. It wasn't like we have today where we have cars and so we just kind of move in and out of each other's lives. If you lived, for example, in Coboconk, you knew everyone in Coboconk because this was your world. Going to Lindsay would have been one heck of a trip back in the day. Not just, I got to go pick up something for dinner tonight. It was a major, major responsibility. It was a major, major life decision. It caused ripples throughout the community. And so, in fact, marriage was actually taken incredibly seriously, and the community enforced this. Other men would have gotten in line and enforced the male's role in that marriage. Older women would have come along and enforced the lady's role in their marriage. And this was what allowed their society to go along so cohesively and so well for so many years. See, the problem is we're asking, why are marriages failing? Why is this happening in our society today? The problem is we don't even take it that seriously right from the beginning. We don't treat it with the preciousness. They literally wrote a song about it. What was that stupid song, Rebecca? And it annoyed me. And it was when we got married. I'm going to marry her anyway. What was that song? You know what I'm talking about? Yeah, I can't remember the name of it. Anyway, but you guys, you probably are familiar with it. You've heard the song. He's talking about how the father won't give him permission. He's like, I'm going to do it anyway. And it's amazing that is kind of where we've come to in this society. That the fact that we don't even talk to families, we don't engage in families. How many of you actually, before you got married, decided to talk to your parents about, hey, like, okay, my head's up in a cloud right now. I'm not thinking straight. Mom, Dad, what am I doing the right thing? I remember I did that. My dad's, for all transparency, my dad's not a Christian. He thought it was the weirdest thing ever. He's like, well, you got to marry her. I was like, yeah, I know, but you know me, Dad, and I'm not thinking straight right now because I'm dating this girl and things are going really well, and I think they're going well, but what do you think? He thought it was so strange. But it just reinforces what Jesus mentions in verses 33 to 37. And by the way, this doesn't just apply to marriage and divorce, to adultery. This literally applies to everything in our lives. If we don't take it so seriously right from the get-go, right from the kickoff, right from the beginning, then unfortunately we are going to see failure in our lives. And if we don't allow our word to mean something, our word to be our bond, like, isn't it amazing, right? That used to be all it took, right? You make a deal, John. How do you seal the deal? A handshake. That's enough, and it's done, right? Because your word means something. And what happens if someone goes back on that handshake? How likely are you to make a deal with them again? Never. Never. Because you can't violate that trust. This is what Jesus is letting us know even then. Look, you guys don't have much control over anything. You certainly don't have control over heaven. You certainly don't have control over earth. You don't have any control over Jerusalem. And I love that he points out, you don't even have the ability to control the color of your hair. All right? You can't help if you go gray. Trust me, I know I can't help it because it's happening anyway. Let your yes be yes and your no be no. But it all starts with, we need to be a serious people who take our decisions very seriously, and allow ourselves to, you know what? I'm going to treat this like covenant. Despite what the world says, despite what the government of Ontario says, I'm going to say, you know what? This is covenant, and I'm going to live up to my end no matter what. Because guess what? 2 years go by, 3 years go by, 5 years go by, 12 years go by. Had to think about that real quick. Rebecca wasn't paying attention, so I got away with it anyway. Right? Days go by, years go by. Things change. Your relationship changes. People change. But are you still willing to live up to your word? Are you still willing to see it through to the very end? Because if not, I like actually how it says, when you violate your word, verse 32, if you divorce your wife, you make her the victim. If a wife divorces her husband, she makes him the victim. Why? Because you made an oath. And you said, hey, I'm going to live by this, you're going to do this, and I'm going to love, what do we normally say? I'm going to love, cherish you in sickness and in health, like through good times and bad times, through all the difficulty. How many times do we actually see that go through? I mean, there's some here that have been married for a long time. They can probably tell you about a lot of the good times and a lot of the bad times. And it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when they happen, because they will happen, both good and bad. But we need to be people of our word. We need to live by what we say and own what we say and be people what we believe. Because if we're going to take what Jesus says seriously, if we're going to really live it out, if we want to say that we're Christians and we think that God's word is important, we need to take this very seriously. Let our yes be yes and our no be no. Don't embellish it in any other way. We don't need to clarify. The handshake is the ultimate agreement. Yep, this is what we're going to do. and live up to that. Don't make bad oaths.